26 January 2023. Today I am in a foul mood. Our country is falling apart, and it is falling apart at a rate that is absolutely astounding. The big problem I have is that it is undeniable. We have a lot of idiots, unqualified, uneducated, inexperienced people in charge of our lives, in charge of our country. People that does not have the mental capacity to tie their shit decisions to bigger shit results. They cannot see they don't see the connection between an idiotic decision and a disaster created by that fucking decision. They cannot see it.
Every society functions with a set of economic and political rules, created and enforced by the state and the citizens collectively. Economic institutions shape economic incentives, but it is the political process that determines the economic system in which people live under. For example, it is the political institutions of a nation that determine the ability of citizens to control their politicians and influence how their politicians behave. Political institutions determine whether politicians are agents of the citizens or abuse their power entrusted to them by those citizens. Economic institutions are critical for determining whether a country is poor or prosperous, but it is political institutions that determine what economic institutions a country has. The elites and the average citizen will often disagree about which set of institutions should remain in place and which ones should be changed. What rules society ends up with is determined by politics, which has power and determines how that power should be exercised. The theory held by so many economists for why some nations are poor and some are rich is the ignorance hypothesis. It asserts that world inequality exists because we, or our rulers, do not know how to make poor countries rich. There are examples of leaders who adopted disastrous policies because they were mistaken about their consequences. But if ignorance was the problem, then well-meaning leaders would quickly learn what types of policies increased their citizens' incomes and would then gravitate towards them. Leaders of nations that have impoverished much of their populations didn't allow their nations to be impoverished because they thought it was good economics. They did so because they could get away with it and enrich themselves at the expense of the population.
Look at this. Africa, and look at the top picture. A squatter camp. Poverty and squalor. Then the world donates 1.4 trillion. And look at the second picture. Fuck all has changed, but there's 2 Land Rovers there. That is how they work. Then look at this shit. In the US African Summit, a memorandum was signed that will have governments of Zimbabwe, Zambia, and the DR Congo surrender the supply chain and procurement of copper and cobalt to American control. What the fuck is that? The white settlers they had in those countries were building the fucking country. They were creating jobs, they were creating industry, they were planting food. Now these stupid fucking freedom fighters, they give it to the Americans. And you think the Americans are going to treat the citizens kindly? They're going to steal them blind. That's what they will do. But that is stupid fucking idiots in charge. When will they understand that they are not a mental match for these snakes from the West?
Countries differ in their economic successes because of their different institutions, the rules influencing how the economy works, and the incentives that motivate people. Inclusive economic institutions are those that allow and encourage participation by the great mass of people, in economic activities and that make the best use of their talents and skills, and that enables individuals to make the choices that they wish. To be inclusive, economic institutions must feature secure private property, an unbiased system of law, and a provision of public services that provides a level playing field in which people can exchange and contract with each other. It also must permit the entry of new businesses. Extractive economic institutions are extractive because such institutions are designed to extract incomes and wealth from one subset of society to benefit a different subset of society. Inclusive economic institutions create inclusive markets and provide a level playing field. Those who have good ideas are able to start businesses, and therefore workers tend to go to activities where their productivity is greater, and in effect, less efficient firms are replaced by more efficient ones. Inclusive institutions also pave the way for two engines of prosperity, which are technology and education. Sustained economic growth is almost always accompanied by technological improvements that enable people, land, and existing capital to become more productive. Inclusive institutions creates the ability for economic institutions to harness the potential of inclusive markets, which encourage technological innovations, invest in people, and mobilize the talents and skills of large numbers of individuals, which is critical for economic growth. When there is conflict over institutions, what happens depends on the people who win the game of politics, which is dependent on who can get more support, obtain additional resources, and form more effective alliances. In short, who wins depends on the distribution of political power in society. Extractive political institutions concentrate power in the hands of a narrow elite and place few constraints on the exercise of this power. Therefore, extractive economic institutions are then often structured by the elites to extract resources from the rest of society. In this regard, extractive economic institutions in turn enrich the same elites, and their economic wealth help consolidate their political dominance. Inclusive political institutions vesting power broadly would tend to uproot economic institutions that expropriate the resources of the many, erect entry barriers, and suppress the functioning of markets so that only a few benefit. Therefore, those controlling political power cannot easily use it to set up extractive economic institutions for their own benefit. In this regard, inclusive institutions in turn create more equitable distribution of resources, facilitating the persistence of inclusive political institutions. Powerful groups often stand against economic progress because growth only moves forward if it isn't blocked by economic losers who anticipate that their economic privileges will be lost. And in turn, these economic losers fear that their political power will be eroded. Conflict over income and power translates into conflict over the rules of the game, which determines the economic activities and who will benefit from that economic activity. If the groups standing against growth win, they can successfully block economic growth and the economy will stagnate. Nations fail today because the extractive economic institutions do not create the incentives needed for people to save, invest, and innovate, and therefore extractive political institutions support extractive economic institutions by cementing power for those who benefit from the extraction.